So Hugh asked a very good question at the start of his presentation, why is he here? So I'll answer the same question for me as well. So social media doesn't exist in isolation. In fact, no digital channel exists in isolation. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is, rather than the individual channel of social or mobile or anything else, is how all those things come together, how they're all part of something bigger. Before I do that, though, I want to talk about Johannes Gutenberg, the inventor of the printing press. Somewhere around 1439, Gutenberg invented the printing press, printed his first document, a Bible, printed the second one, and gave it to the people around him to show them how the printing press worked. And it's one of the most amazing inventions of the history of mankind. It's totally changed the way we communicate. It democratized the sharing of information and democratized the sharing of knowledge that had previously been exclusively held by a very small number of people. And that's not the only amazing thing about what Gutenberg did. The other thing that's amazing about it is that he did something that had never been done before in the entire history of humankind. The second Bible that he printed was identical to the first. It was the first time in the whole of humankind that two identical objects had been made. And people struggled to understand how two things could be the same. It was not possible, because everything that had been made by mankind before that was unique and individual. But from Gutenberg onwards, we were able to create things that were the same, identical, made the same way. And one of the reasons why people struggled to understand it was they just couldn't get their heads round how this change had come about and what this change meant. Those people who understood it were at the vanguard of the start of the Italian Renaissance, but for many others, they really struggled to understand, what is this change about? We're in exactly the same position now. The coming technologies now that we see with artificial intelligence and beyond are going to have even more of a dramatic impact upon the way in which we live our lives and the way in which we operate our businesses and the way in which we become marketers than mobile phones have, than the internet had before them. That change is coming, but we struggle to understand that change. It's called the history illusion. We find it much easier as humans to look at the past and think about the past than we do to imagine the future. And so part of what we need to talk about today is really about change. It's about getting over the future shock of what is being brought to us by the internet, by mobile, and now by artificial intelligence and beyond that. Too much change in too short a period of time is what we all find difficult to handle. So that's what really about this presentation is really going to be about change. Now, I come from a kind of an old school of presenting, maybe sort of like Paul himself there, is I was always taught that when you're presenting to people, you should tell them right from the start what you're going to tell them about, then tell them about it, and then tell them about it again at the end, so that they hear it 3 times over. So I'm going to do that. My entire presentation now can be summed up in one slide, and it's this. The more connected devices that we have in our lives, the more constantly connected that we are. The more constantly connected we are, the more we live in a state of connectedness. The more we live in a state of connectedness, the greater that technological change becomes in our own behavior. When you add those 3 things together, being connected, living in a state of connectedness, and changing our behavior, those things add up to us all becoming connected individuals. And I'm going to argue with you that we now live in the era of the connected individual, which means that as marketers, we need to become connected marketers. So the rest of my presentation is about that. The change towards becoming connected marketers is not a revolutionary one, it's an evolutionary one. But for those of you in here who run their own businesses rather than those of you who are studying to join the working world, I would ask you about this. If you're going to change, then part of change is recognizing that you have to let go of something that you used to do in order to do something new. And what's important for you in this audience listening today is two things, really. If you run your own business, then your brand will be controlled and your destiny will be controlled by your ability to reach the connected individual. I'm going to demonstrate that to you. But if you're here studying and you intend to end up in a career somewhere in the marketing world, then your career is going to be shaped by your ability to learn and to relearn how to live in the world of this connected individual. So over the last 100 years or so, competition between business has gone through 4 distinct phases. We used to compete on the terms of manufacturing. People who made stuff, they were the kings. Then we went through the stage of people who did retail. They were the kings. The people who distributed products, they were the kings. Somewhere around the 1990s, that switched to becoming information was key. The people who controlled what information was held about you or your product or your market, they were the keys. It's the birthplace of the internet age. But somewhere around 1997, the invention of the smartphone, slightly before that with Nokia, changed. It became the age of the customer. Or at least this is all according to Forrester, who talk about those 4 ages. And they say that we're in this 20-year business cycle. And I think what Forrester have missed is that actually that change in the last 5 years, and in particular in the last 3, has fundamentally affected our behavior. So actually, we are entering the age of the connected individual. And I'm very particular about saying the word individual. I don't mean connected consumer. I don't mean connected shopper, connected patient, or connected voter. I mean connected individual. We are sometimes all 4 of those other things, and other times we are not. I don't need to kind of explain it to you. You know it's the first thing in the morning that you look at, the last thing at night. You know that for some of us, actually, not even when we're asleep are we not connected. We have devices on our wrists or on our feet that measure our sleep patterns. You know that wherever you go, one of the first things that you do is look for the Wi-Fi signal, because we live in this age of continuous and ubiquitous connectivity. We have to be connected to our digital selves to feel whole. And it's no longer a world of digital immigrants or digital natives. It's just a world of digital dependence. This is the world that we live in now. And it's a world where connectivity, and mobile in particular, has both caused and enabled an irrevocable change in our behavior as consumers. Mobiles have in fact become our external brains. They allow us to know things we didn't used to know in an instant, or forget things we used to have to remember. We know that the downside of all of that instant access to information, is that we live in the age of distraction. Distraction is the new normal. It becomes harder and harder to grab people's attention, which is why we are not living in connected consumer world all the time. But we do live with this state of connectedness. You know that there's almost no question that I can ask you that in a heartbeat you can take your phone out and find the answer to. You live with that knowledge of constant connectivity. We live in something we might call the impulse economy. And it's fueled by our need for instant gratification. And lots of the other speakers today have talked about the need to create content that appeals to people at the right time and the right place. And it's that kind of thing that we're dealing with. We live in, as Google calls it, the world of micro moments. Let me illustrate that to you in a very clear, easy way. I could say to you right now, there's a book I think everybody in this room should read. What am I reading? I'm reading on the plane on the way. I was reading The Circle. Anybody here read The Circle? Hand up. You should all read The Circle. The Circle is a fictional account about a company which may or may not be Facebook and Google merged together, but it talks about what happens when we record all of the information in our lives, and all of that information is available to everybody else. It's a huge idea. It's actually being made into a film. It'll come out in the next 2-3 months, I think, starring Tom Hanks. But it's a great book. But while I'm talking about it, you could take out your phone, you could look for it on Amazon, you could add it to your wish list, you could buy it instantly. If you're on Amazon Prime, you could have it delivered to your home or to your office tomorrow. And for 30 seconds out of my 45-minute presentation, you become a connected consumer. But the rest of the time you are not, but you live in a state of connectedness. You know that connectivity is here next to you. And the younger that you are, the more likely it is that you will see your physical self and your digital self as being exactly the same thing. You will see no difference between them. Being with your friends online or connected to them through Snapchat stories or through Messenger or any other type of social media means that you are with them in a very real way for you. The younger that you are, the likelihood is that you will never be disconnected. How many people have seen on a Facebook post a picture of a prenatal picture, a baby scan? Anybody seen baby scans held up? Okay, half the audience. We have a digital presence before we're even born. We will not be disconnected from our digital selves. And so that's a real new thing to get used to. And the more connectivity that we have, the more points of connectivity through the internet of everything, or the internet of me, or whatever you want to call it, the more sensors that we have in our lives, the more data that's being collected, the more connected that we are, the more that connectivity has to be taken into account. And we'll have something like 50 connected devices in our homes. And then we're going to add on top of all of that augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, mixed reality. All of those things come into play as we live our connected lives. The CMO or marketing director of the next 20 years is going to be the conductor of an orchestra. Not an expert in one thing, but someone who knows how to take all the digital channels and make them all work in concert and work in harmony. And the biggest brands in the world have figured out that that's what they need to take into account of. That's where they need to go. They need to follow where we have gone as connected individuals. Because as connected individuals, they know that we have to create connected brands that appeal to us, and we have to become connected marketers. So a connected marketer is one that will create, develop, and maintain a brand that takes into account what the connected individual wants. Let me give you some examples of that. A connected brand pulls together physical and digital experiences together. So I fly to the States maybe 6 times a year, and I always go on Virgin Atlantic. Has a good physical service, clearly, but it also has a great digital service. It's got a good website, it's got a good mobile site, it's got a good mobile app. I check onto the flight using a mobile boarding card. But if it had a really terrible digital experience, I wouldn't use it. If they didn't use a mobile boarding card, I would probably not use it, because I've got used to that level being set for me now. That's what I expect them to do. But essentially, as a physical product, the digital wraparound makes it a connected brand. The other way around, Amazon is the best, probably, digital brand that exists, the best e-commerce brand that existed. But if their physical delivery service was rubbish, we wouldn't use it. They have to fight the other way around to make a physical product blend around their digital product. But it's not enough just to have those two things together. Synchronizing and merging those two different channels together makes it a better brand. So for that, you see people like Marriott Hotels that allow you to check into their hotels now in the States using your mobile phone, or open your room using your mobile phone, order room service and do everything that you want to do using your phone, or you can use the physical service, same as before. It's up to you. The choice is yours as a connected individual about how you're going to use that. We also see fantastic brands like Sephora. I know you don't have them here yet. I believe they are going to come to Ireland at some stage. But Sephora are a fantastic example of having a brand that knows how to use digital in-store, that knows and understands their target audience. They know that their audience needs to understand better how to use makeup. They know that their audience is constantly using YouTube to look at makeup videos, and so they make all of that content available in store, and they help people select products using digital in-store. They also figure out, like many other brands have done, that every service will become digital. Everywhere you go physically will have an ability to become digital, because you'll be able to connect with it using your mobile phone. The Sci-Fi channel in the States now when you're watching TV shows and you have Philips Hue lighting installed in your house, changes the lighting automatically to sync with the TV programs you're watching. If the character is in the dark, your room goes in the dark. If they go out into the bright sunlight, your room goes into bright sunlight. They have merged and synchronized their digital experience. And of course, last year we saw the best example of merging digital and physical together, Pokemon Go. That was an example of a mixed reality experience, both physical and digital at the same time. And my guess is, for those of you who played that, after a while you completely forget about the fact that it's on my mobile phone, but I'm outdoors when I do it. It just becomes the Pokemon Go experience. Those two things are added together. And the best technology will be stuff that just disappears into the background. It won't be stuff that we have to consciously think, oh, I need to open my phone to make that happen. We just know it's there. Really great brands figure out that actually what they need to do is to merge digital, physical, and sensorial actions together, because those also added together with emotional experiences create a much stronger brand. Apple are fantastic at doing this. If you think about the last time that you bought, how many of you bought an Apple phone? So those of you who've bought an Apple phone, you know that when you bought the product, or a Mac, you know that when you buy it and you unwrap it, there's an Apple smell, right? You can smell an Apple product. It has the same smell. No matter which one you open, it always smells the same way. And when you take the phone out of the box, it takes time to drop out, okay? Those things are not random. That's designed in. It's designed to give you a better sensorial experience so that when you smell that smell, you think of Apple, you think of new, you think of exciting, you think of unwrapping. And that process there, that's to add to your heightened sense of anticipation. It's all built in. The brand that really gets this best, though, is one that merges physical, digital, sensorial, and emotional experiences all together to solve customer problems. Because that's where it's really at. We really need to understand what our connected individual wants. What are the needs of our target audience? What problems can we solve on their behalf? The brand that really gets that is Starbucks. Starbucks do a fantastic job of blending together those 4 human dimensions, if you like, digital, physical, sensorial, and emotional. And they make a ton of money doing it. Their latest thing, Order and Go, which allows you...
Now you can order and pay for Starbucks on your phone and pick it up at the store. Just go to your Starbucks app and press order. Find your favorite drink on the menu. You can customize it with the number of shots, toppings, or flavors. Maybe hazelnut. How about a bite to eat? Bacon. Your order will be sent to the nearest store, or select a different store to pick it up. Confirm and pay, and you're good to go. When you get to the store, no need to wait in line.
Mobile order for Alex?
Just come pick up your order.
Here you go. Have a nice day. Thank you.
No time, no line.
Order on your mobile phone, using their loyalty app, using their mobile payment scheme. Before you get to the store, you pick up a physical product that absolutely, definitely has a sensorial element to it of taste and smell. All done, not because Starbucks wanted to be cool and do something cool with mobile apps or mobile loyalty or mobile payments, but because they needed to reduce the biggest point of friction in their stores, which was queuing at the busiest time of day. That is the reason why that app has been put in place and that functionality has been put in place, because reducing friction in the consumer journey and the individual journey is an absolutely vital element. Order and Pay now represents 5% of their total income, which is billions of dollars. If you've ever been to a Starbucks, you also know they've got a particular sound. Many parts of the world, they've got to deal with Spotify or somebody else. Starbucks only plays new music, because they want you to associate Starbucks with new and with discovery. They also emphasize that moment of shouting out your name. Okay, we all know hilariously that they probably half the time don't get people's name right, but it's a deliberate policy designed to create a personal connection between you and the barista, so that not only do you have this sensorial experience, you have another physical touch point. All of those things are designed into their business. They're looking for ways to combine together those 4 things, digital, physical, sensorial, and emotional, to create a stronger brand and a connection with you. So how are they doing it? So we've worked with hundreds of brands around the world over the last 10 years. And we kind of developed a process of helping brands do it, but we've also reverse engineered looking at what they've done to do it. We call it a connected marketer. So the connected marketer framework for us is managing those 4 human dimensions, figuring out that there are different ways, layers of connectivity, and then focusing on 4 key tasks. So for the rest of this presentation, I'm just going to talk about those 4 key tasks. What are the things that marketers do to become connected marketers? Well, they do these 4 things. They first of all build understanding of their target audience, of the connected individual. They find ways to enable that connected individual. They find ways to remove the barriers to engagement with them. And they focus on ways to be of service to the individual. So let's look at each of those in turn. How do they build understanding? They build it through a whole range of things. They build it through research. They build it through having access to data, both their own second-party and third-party data. They do it through data science, because of course, the more data you have, the more you have to manage and understand how to get results out of that data. They do it through using behavioral economics, because actually, we don't do what we say we would do in research. We behave in very different ways. Our lives and our decisions are heavily influenced by our biases. So if you're working in a marketing role now, or if you're studying for marketing role now, I would heavily suggest that you start looking at the role that behavioral economics has in decision making. They ask and listen. It kind of sounds old-fashioned, but they do a lot of that through social media. But most of that, they apply to journey and experience mapping. They figure out a way to look at the individual journey. If we know that attention is a finite resource, then it makes it even more important to know your customers. Because, funnily enough, we're not all the same. Research is allowing us to capture what people do closer to the point of experience. And that's important because all of us are different. We all have different experiences. We have our own personal experience. One of the things that kind of drives me crazy, and thankfully nobody said it on the stage, so I'm not kind of pushing back on any of the previous speakers, is, but lazy marketing that describes all of your customer base as millennials won't cut it. Because actually, we're all very, very different. Even me. Which me do you mean when you want to engage with me? You mean this guy, the guy on the stage? If you're connecting with the guy on the stage, then sure, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Twitter, those are the kind of things. But if you're connecting with me as in my family, then that would be a completely different set of channels. And actually, if you're connecting with me when I'm doing the thing that I like most, Paul, which is riding a bike, somewhere around the world, although I doubt I'll ever get to 100 million earn-out, so I'll never get on one of your bike rides, but maybe I can, in 2 weeks' time, I'll be riding in South Africa and riding there. But there's 3 other channels I use. Completely different than the others. The only time I use Facebook is to connect to people who have the same surname with me, or people who ride a bike who I know, so I can just post, I'm in South Africa on a bike, you're not, you're at work. That's the only purpose of using Facebook for me. Equally, my other great passion in life, outside of family, outside of cycling, would tell you where I'm going to be with my sons for at least 48 times a year. 48 times a year, you know for 2.5 hours exactly what I'm doing. That may tell you there's an entirely appropriate time for you to engage with me as an individual, or it may say to me, do not engage during any of those times because it will just annoy him if you're connecting with him at that point. And then so those 4 things are all me, all completely different channels, all different aspects of my lives, and you all have those. And we all equally have times in our lives that are completely inexplicable where you just cannot talk to people and doing it. If you ask me later, I'll explain how it happened, but thank you, Google, for making it happen. So, all the digital stuff that we do produces digital signals. Those signals reveal insights about us. We can take those signals and amplify them by context. What do I mean by that? I mean, when we use social media, when we use the internet, when we use mobile devices, we can work out from all those things, what are your interests, your attitudes, your behaviors? What are the things who are you influenced by and who can you influence in return? Who are you connected to? If we take all of those and amplify them by the time of day, or the context in which you're doing, the location, or who you're connecting with, or the channel you're using, that gives us tons of insight about you as an individual. And what brands are really looking for is signals of intent. And so what we really want to do is find out how do we get the signals of intent out of our connected individual. Partly that can be through something like social listening. Partly that can be by asking questions and understanding the questions that our audience is asking. And a couple of speakers already talked about that, the need to go and understand what questions our audience is asking in order to be able to answer those. Well, 80% of all of our searches are done spontaneously on smartphones. And that has an influence particularly because a lot of the questions that we're asking and looking for answers are on YouTube. The places that we go to most frequently on the internet are all about discovery. They're all about answering questions. They're all about either helping us find content or helping us find the answers. And as I said, a lot of that is looked at on YouTube first time around. So we should start with our connected individual, start with what is their need, how can we solve that? There are, generally speaking, 3 types of needs that all of us have in our lives. There's the things that we want to remove from our lives, the frictions. There's the things that we kind of know we should do, saving, losing weight, getting fit. And then there's pretty much the things that we want to do, the stuff that we find is exciting. Your brand can appeal to more than one of those, but you should be very clear about which one of those needs your connected individual has and how your brand can help meet those needs. So figuring out what type of customer needs you've got, and there's a whole load of others. I've just highlighted 3 here. Once we know who our individual is, we find ways to enable them. Enable them. And if we enable them, we can connect and engage and influence their behavior. How would we do that? We would accept, first of all, there's no linear customer journey, if there ever was one. Nobody goes from awareness through to advocacy, and in fact, every individual has their own journey. We can use things like what I would call directed shopping, use mobile technologies as an assistance to the shopping or the consumption mode that you've got. We definitely want more and more personalization in our lives. We want, and you want as brands, to build all the different marketing technologies. I counted across all of the different presentations that everybody else had, I think 18 different mentions of different technologies. Those senior marketing people who were talking to you earlier on today are all wrestling with this, how do I manage all the different marketing technologies that are available to me and bring them all together? And I would argue that we want to move away from segments to personas and then eventually onto profiles, and I'll talk about that again in a moment. And of course, be omni-channel and channel agnostic. So, a hard thing. The customer journey is not a simple left to right, awareness to advocacy journey. The most popular customer journey map around at the moment seems to be this one from McKinsey, which kind of suggests it's a circular thing. We enter and exit at multiple different points. That's kind of a good thing, except for the fact that it's not about how you want to sell, it's about how I want to buy. So actually, what you should be doing is using the language that I use when I'm in a customer journey. I want to find stuff, choose stuff, buy it, experience it, share it, and maybe I will love it or like it and tell other people about it. So for those who are running brands in this room, you should be thinking about how can I do one or more of these things on behalf of the connected individual? What is their needs? So we're also moving away from marketers using broad segmentation, away from just saying we're reaching millennials, people aged 25 to 35 who live in Dublin. I mean, that's kind of lazy marketing, right? We should at least be getting towards grouping them via their behaviors, who do the following types of things. But actually, the reality is that we're collecting so much data on people, we should be using personalization. And it's really hard. As I said, part of the challenge is there's so much marketing technology, it's really difficult to get your head around. This is a current map of the marketing technology landscape produced last March. It has 3,457 different companies on, all of whom do some of the stuff that these people talked about here, which gives you an idea of just how difficult the job is. And it's not going to get any easier. That's last year's map. I know that this year's is going to have more than 4,000 companies on it, because I've spoken to the guy who produced it. So it's just going to get harder and more complex. On the other side, we don't want the lives of our consumers or our connected individuals to get harder and more complex. We want it to get easier. We want to find ways of making their lives easier. We want to recognize that actually there's a connectivity paradox. The more connected they are, the more confusing it can be. The more choice I have, the harder I find it to make a decision. So we look for ways to make it easier for people to make decisions. We look for ways to create frictionless experiences. Why? Because nobody likes complexity. Nobody really wants to do anything that's complex. So looking for ways to strip the complexity out of dealing with you or your business is obviously a good thing. We also need to recognize that psychologically people go through these things called decision fatigue, the principle of least effort. If we have too many choices, we get bored with the number of choices, and then we just kind of plump for the easiest to go for. And we're the one that has the least amount of effort. President Obama was famous for saying that he actually only wore 2 colors of suits. Why? Because he had too many things to think about in his life other than what clothes he was going to wear for the day. So that stripped out some of the problems or some of the things he had to think about during his life. And that is now being applied by smarter brands to say, how do we reduce friction in someone's life? If we're a credit card company, how would we reduce the friction of making you tap into your mobile phone's 16-digit number? Why don't we just let you use your fingerprint? Why don't we just use iris recognition from your phone to help reduce this cognitive load? If you're buying wine from Amazon, for instance, they know that most people don't know anything about wine. Whatever they bluff their way through, most people know bugger all about wine. So what they do is they make a decision based upon price as a proxy. Is it for me? Is it for me and my girlfriend or my wife? Am I going to somebody else's house for dinner, or is it a gift? That's the decision-making process that most people go through with buying wine. Amazon have said, well, actually, the easier thing to do is to say, what food are you eating it with? What do you want it to taste like? Which country does it come from? Answer those questions, and then we'll help with reviews and recommendations to bring you down to the right level. And Amazon are really smart at figuring out, actually, what we need to do is to make it as easy as possible. So we don't even want you to type stuff out. We just want you to say it out loud, and then we'll deal with you. So every one of their efforts, when you look at what Amazon does, is about reducing friction to make it as easy as possible to deal with you. Our last example of reducing friction. 2 years ago, Disney did a review of all their theme parks, and they worked out, not surprisingly, if anybody's been there, the biggest bugbear of every visitor is the amount of time they spend queuing. So they introduced RFID bands. You go to the queue, you put your band up against the reader, it reads you're there, it says you're now in the queue, you can go off and do something else. And then it buzzes when your turn comes up at the queue. So you don't actually physically need to be there. But they are using a technology to solve that experience. They did not start with, how can we use this really cool tech? They started with, how can we blend physical and digital together to reduce the friction in the experience that someone has with our brand? And that is going to happen in spades now with the introduction of bots. Sadly, I don't have time to talk about that, but if you're not, as a marketer, if you're not already trying bots on Facebook, then start doing it. Start gaining an understanding by using the experiences. Start with someone like H&M or Kayak if you use search terms. Our last key task is this: how can we be of service to the connected individual? We can do that in a number of ways. Yes, we can understand them. Yes, we can recognize them. We can automate the process of dealing with us, make it easier for them to deal with. We can add personalization. We can use contextual relevance. I'll come back to it in a moment. But crucially, for all the data that we're collecting, we should be thinking, how can I create value for and with the connected individual, not from them? The first instinct of many brands is, I want to grab as much data as I possibly can and create as much value for me out of it. Actually, a much smarter way of doing it is say, all the data that I collect, how can I generate more value for somebody else in doing that? Because we need to recognize, what does the individual want? Well, actually, we want a whole load of things. We come to every digital experience that we have with a brand with a whole load of expectations that you'll do for us. Where do we get those expectations from? Well, we get them from the best of class. We get them from GAFA, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple. Those are the people who set the bar. Not your business today, but the best digital experience I have. Not you or your competitor, the best of what I can see. And lazy marketing, I know, but the millennials in the audience will give way to Generation Z, or Generation Z as the Americans like to call it, or Centennials. So we're moving away from people who say, I prefer you to do by mobile, to people who say mobile only. And you're going to have to deal with that. We're also, if we're thinking about being of service, we're witnessing the end of average, the end of selling stuff to people or engaging with people based upon the average person. Because you know what? We don't like average. When it really comes to it, we prefer bespoke. We prefer something that's individual to us. So I don't want the same thing as everybody else got. I want an individual recommendation made for me. If you look on your Amazon homepage when you go back to your rooms tonight, or you're back to your businesses tomorrow, have a look at the personalization that's on your Amazon homepage. 8 points of personalization on every single one of our homepages, and more, the more they can get to. And the more that they can reduce your friction in the buying process, the better for them. Why do we want to collect all that big data, though? If we're collecting it all, what do we want to do with it? Well, we know that the big data that we're collecting can influence small decisions. We know that in the mobile space, mobile is allowing us to move from historic to predictive behavior. It's allowing us to move to contextual relevance. That's the USP that mobile brings to the connected individual. The ability to send the right message to the right person, the right time, and the right place. Mobile is unique in being able to do that. No other channel can do all those 4 things together. But we can't do it without all the tech at scale. we need marketing automation in order to be able to do all this stuff at scale. So one of the big things that we need to get our grips with is what technology can deliver a highly personalized, highly contextual relevant experience for every single individual person, but do it at scale so that we're not manually managing it. And that's pretty hard challenging. We'll also be able to get more and more data, not just from our own company and our own engagement with individuals, but from others. Other people will bring data to us, which means over time we're going to have to become data scientists. You're either going to have to hire people who can do it or learn how to do it yourself. My suggestion to you, and I've said this already to the group I was running a workshop with this afternoon, so apologies to those of you who heard this rant already. For all of you who are students here studying marketing, get to grips now with the idea that you need to understand tech. Don't go into marketing thinking, I'm only going to do the creative bit, I don't need to understand the rest. You do need to understand it. Don't switch off when somebody says analytics. Don't switch off when they say artificial intelligence or deep learning or anything like that. Learn how to do it, because you will not be employable in marketing if you cannot get your head around the technology part of your job. Rant over, but I really want you to understand that that's the case. All that data, though, has a downside. We have to collect data, but part of the last thing I'm going to say to you is this. As marketers, we cannot just be collecting data and storing it and using it without recognizing that the relationship that we have with data as individuals is changing. We expect something different from that. Many companies in the technology world are building themselves upon capturing and using our digital data. But actually, I think this may end up with us saying that privacy becomes a luxury in the 21st century. We are heading towards a place where so much data is being collected about us, it's almost impossible to be private anymore. But the way we think about that data is changing. We no longer think of it as being data about me. We think of it as being my data. It's not the bank's data about my account, it's my data about that. So as marketers, we need to change to recognize a different relationship. Privacy is not a binary thing. You don't switch it on and off. It is a dynamic thing. It is a process that we need to work through times. Don't do this thing of setting out terms and conditions and saying, well, we told them all what we were going to do with their data, and then hide it somewhere in massive, incomprehensible terms and conditions. Change from using terms and conditions and terms of service to using terms of trust. Very simple, short, one-sentence things that say, this is what we want to do with your data. Find a way to balance the creepy and the clever use of personal data in a way that the individual will find acceptable. There's a really easy way to do it. Start by looking at every piece of data you collect and think of these three principles: transparency, notice, choice. Be clear about what data you're collecting, when you're collecting it, and give me, the individual, a choice as to whether I want to share that data with you. I don't want you to think, though, that everything is only about data and it's only about data science. There is still a huge role in marketing going forward, dealing with the connected individual, for problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, ideation, collaboration. Those are 5 other key skills that marketers need to learn. Because actually, going back to my very first story, which was about the birth of the Italian Renaissance, what I'm really looking for you all to be is a Renaissance man or a Renaissance woman. Leonardo da Vinci would not be defined by one thing only. He was not only a painter, but he was an architect, he was a stonemason, and he did 100 other things. He found ways of taking inspiration from many different other worlds to help him learn about what he was doing. He's in fact a great example of how marketing is a blend of both science and art. So I'm going to finish by saying this to you. The connected marketer, one that understands and creates a brand that appeals to the needs of the connected individual, that takes 4 key human dimensions: digital, physical, sensorial, and emotional, and uses those to solve customer problems. As a business, we've worked out a way of how to help people do that. If you want to know more about that, or any of the other parts of that, or you want copies of the slides, then I'm very happy to take your requests at the end of that. But other than that, thank you very much for your time.